In the original 13-year run of the Real American Hero toy line, quite a number of crazy, colorful, and iconic bad guys were created to add endless misery into the lives of the Joes. But just like the Joes, who had quite humble beginnings as a bunch of mostly green uniformed army men, Cobra 2 started out in an equally unspectacular fashion with a couple of masked up soldiers dressed in blue who didn't really look that evil or determined to rule the world. Fortunately, things changed pretty quickly the following year when Hasbro threw in a new character with all the classic villain elements in place. Eye patch? Check. Thin and sharp mustache? Check. And of course, a majorly bloody good name. Check, check, check. Do you remember the first time you opened up the 1982 G.I. Joe catalog? Half of the first side showcased all the cool action figures available, about 90% of which, of course, were Joes, which left an itty-bitty portion at the end for two more lonely dudes who looked almost identical with their blue uniforms and black masks, simply referred to as Cobra. Enemy. Look, I loved the original Cobra Soldier and Officer. In fact, they were two figures that I deliberately chose for myself at the toy store, along with a Polar Battle Bear ski-mobile that became their de facto vehicle. For the life of me, I just couldn't get myself a snow job anywhere. Okay, get your minds out of the gutter. I said snow. But anyway, despite my nostalgic pull to these two guys, even I have to admit that their almost plain generic designs didn't really evoke the look of a bad guy, or to be more specific, a villain. Case in point, if you had absolutely zero knowledge of G.I. Joe and were presented with these dudes along with Snake Eyes, I'm pretty confident that many peeps would assume that the commando decked out all in black was the enemy. Fortunately, it didn't take long for Hasbro to give us a character the following year that left no doubt in anyone's mind on whose side he was on. Like I mentioned earlier, Major Bludd had all the classic elements of your cliché villain from the 80s. Thin twisty mustache and eye patch aside, Major Bludd was also dressed in dark brown and black, topped off with a unique helmet with a sort of pointy widow's peak shape at the front. He also had what seemed to be a robotic-looking right arm, which in actuality was merely heavy armor to protect him from the blasts generated by his weapon of choice, a rocket-firing gun. And finally, he wore a collection of army dog tags around his neck, which presumably belonged to soldiers that he had dispatched. So as per his file card, hailing from the land of Down Under, Australia, Major Sebastian Bludd had the designation of a mercenary, which is defined as a professional soldier hired to serve in a foreign army, and one who is primarily concerned with making money even at the expense of ethics, which, if you ask me, fits the Major to a T. Of course, Bludd had his own take on his profession as he profoundly states, "A mercenary's job is a heartless one. I'm a soldier for hire like a pawn shop gun. My ruthless tactics keep you on your toes, because I fight 'em all, whether friend or foe." Yes, this mercenary is apparently a fan of poetry. Bad poetry, but poetry nonetheless. And he also comes with some sound uplifting advice as well. When you're feeling low and woozy, slap a fresh clip in your Uzi. Assume the proper firing stance, and make the suckers jump and dance. Anyway, while Major Bludd was part of the second wave of Joes released in 1983, he was actually made available before his wave mates, as he was first offered as an exclusive mail-away figure a few months prior. What's very interesting though was the mechanics on how to get this exclusive Bludd, unlike the usual mail-away toys that required the use of flag points that could be cut out of the action figure card backs and vehicle boxes. If you wanted this Bludd, you needed to send in 3 faces of any other figures cut out from the fronts of their card packaging. This odd requirement was in the words of the then Joe product manager Kirk Bozigian, whose face was incidentally used as the basis for the Joe MP law, Hasbro's diabolical attempt to make kids buy more toys. Since the usual practice in the day was to throw away the rest of the packaging once the file cards and flag points were cut out. I, on the other hand, meticulously cut out every single little character picture on the back to use as tokens for my homemade G.I. Joe board game. Another story for another time. So yeah, in order to get this special Major Bludd, you needed the heads of 3 more Joes. Quite fitting for a mercenary if you ask me. Ultimately though, if headhunting wasn't your cup of tea, then all you had to do was wait a few more months for the regular release version of the Major, which was essentially the same figure. And speaking of that figure, because of his early availability, Major Bludd has the esteemed distinction of being the very first G.I. Joe action figure released to sport the swivel arm articulation. And yes, it literally was just one arm, as his right arm, the heavily armored one, was actually just one molded piece with zero articulation below the shoulder, which you could mostly chalk up to a cost-saving thing. In the original Sunpo cartoon, despite being a mercenary for all intents and purposes, Major Bludd was Cobra, and the field commander for many of the earlier world-dominating missions and operations, such as opening up the very first animated miniseries by leading an air raid on the Joe base and taking out quite a number of Sky Strikers in the process, masquerading as a scientist to fool the Joes, and gathering red crystal catalysts from the Arctic Sea of Ice for Cobra's mass device. Basically, he's pretty much everywhere up in the Joes' noses, starting fights that, well, he usually ends up retreating from, but to be fair, he did get those crystals. After the Sunbow series, Major Bludd did make a couple more appearances in later cartoons. First in the more mature and realistic 2009 series G.I. Joe Resolute, where just like in the original cartoon, Bludd opens up this show as well. At least his corpse does. Yup, at the start of Resolute, Bludd's bloody corpse is discovered laying at the feet of the Lincoln Memorial statue with a cobra-hilted dagger jammed into his heart. Apparently, he tried to wrestle leadership from Cobra Commander, but didn't get the memo that this version of Coco was a completely different animal from what we were used to. How different? Well, how about let's blow up the entirety of Moscow and its 10 million plus population just to make a statement different. Now, while that was pretty much all she wrote about Bludd and Resolute, fortunately, he managed to do a little bit better in his next animated outing a year later as a reoccurring character in the 2010 series G.I. Joe Renegades. Okay, fine, he came out in 2 episodes, but those 2 episodes managed to accomplish what no other media to my knowledge ever did with Bludd, which was to offer up a proper explanation for the Major's 2 most distinctive design details, his eye patch and heavily armored arm. In his first appearance in the episode called The Package, he is hired by Cobra to take out a civilian anti-Cobra blogger named Alvin Kibbe, who many fans would recognize as the name of the OG G.I. Joe communications officer, Breaker, of course here amusingly portrayed as a timid little Englishman. Anyway, The Package turns out to be a bomb that basically severely scars Bludd's face and takes out his eye. He survives though and makes his return in the episode Cousins, where he hunts down Roadblock and his cousin, Corporal Herschel Dalton aka Heavy Duty. And while he doesn't sport an eye patch, it's clear that his eye is pretty effed up. This episode culminates in a battle in the swamp where Bludd is basically taken out by an alligator who bites off his right arm. So, at least we know that this Bludd will end up with a robotic appendage. Anyway, it's actually in the original Marvel comics where Major Bludd does most of his damage to both the Joes and Cobra. True to his mercenary ways, Cobra is hired by the ever-paranoid Cobra Commander to take out the weapons supplier Destro, whom he suspects is making plans to overthrow him. So during a night attack on the Joes, Bludd nearly accomplishes his task by pointing his gun turret at the unsuspecting Destro during the heat of battle. Fortunately for Destro, the Baroness, who is driving Bludd's his tank, realizes his treachery and foils his attempt by abruptly and deliberately crashing their tank. Unfortunately for the Baroness, while Bludd manages to escape the crash, he leaves the Baroness to die as the tank inevitably explodes. But despite being severely burned from the ordeal, the Baroness survives as well, as a mummy, leaving poor Destro's girlfriend in a coma. And speaking of comas, let's pause for a while so I can ask you all once again for your support in making my channel grow. If you could give this video a like, comment, and of course a sub, it would be a major help. Definitely no need to sell your blood for this. And as always, any way you choose to go will be very much appreciated, so thank you. Anyway, after his close brush with death, Bludd attempts to escape by hijacking a bus with civilians, but is tracked down by the Joe's Stalker and Grand Slam. He is ultimately taken out by the latter in what is probably Grand Slam's only claim to fame and shining moment ever, as he smashes through the bus windshield to take out the mercenary and save the day. Let me know in the comments if Grand Slam ever did anything else memorable after that. So, after being slammed, in a grand way, Bludd is taken as a prisoner in the Joe headquarters called The Pit, alongside a scarred Cobra officer creatively named Scarface, and a comatose and bandaged up Baroness. And during a Cobra attack on The Pit, Bludd, with the help of Scarface, attempt an escape that results in the death of the original commanding officer of the G.I. Joe team, General Flag, whom Bludd guns down in cold, blood. And true to his opportunistic and backstabby nature, despite his assistance in handling Flag, Bludd leaves Scarface behind in prison as he opts to take the Baroness with him in his escape. You know, to make up for leaving her behind to die in that explosion. Just kidding, he just figured out that she would make a more valuable bargaining chip for him to earn more favor in Cobra. Bludd then takes the Baroness to the Bern Institute of Reconstructive Surgery in Switzerland, home of the greatest plastic surgeons from around the world, who are able to completely restore her face. He then proceeds to use the Baroness to blackmail Cobra Commander to show him the money for rescuing her, threatening to expose his assassination attempt on Destro if he does not pay. Now that's a villain. Eventually though, Major Bludd joins forces with the Baroness and Destro to overthrow the Commander. Together, they devise a plan to have a teenage boy with a grudge against Cobra named William Kessler assassinate the Commander during a Cobra Youth Rally. I mean, you gotta recruit those kids early, right? Anyway, it turns out that William, or Billy as he is more known, is the actual son of Cobra Commander. And when Destro learns of this, his strong sense of honor and family drive him to foil the attempt himself, as he is not willing to stand by while a son murders his own father. After that botched job, Major Bludd decides to take it easy for a bit and lay low, chill, which is quite apt, given one of his early working production names was Major Chill. No really dude, chill. Bludd does make one more notable appearance in the comics as he travels to Castle Destro to pose himself as the Laird and clan head, supposedly at the command of the Cobra Emperor Serpentor, in order to steal the plans for the Terrordrome. But before he is able to do so, the real Destro, long thought dead, returns and exposes Bludd as a fraud. And that's pretty much it for Bludd in the Marvel Comics, which was then taken over by Snake Eyes and ninjas. Actually, that's one thing you can give Bludd. Unlike other iconic characters, he wasn't turned into a ninja. He remained as he always was, the same old, despicable mercenary. That is, until the comic publisher IDW throws us a curveball with a short story from the excellent anthology series Hearts and Minds that adds a new element to the previously almost one-dimensional character. The story starts in your typical manner, portraying Bludd as the cold and cruel mercenary that he is, literally gunning down innocent civilians to do his job. But the story delves deeper into his mindset. Using his love for bad poetry as a springboard, Bludd views himself as an artist on the battlefield. He takes pride in his efficiency and precision, emphasizing that killing should never be sloppy or emotional. To him, there's an art to doing it right. He sees it purely as a profession, a craft he has honed to perfection. He strives to be the best at what he does so that he will always be in demand. He will never be redundant and avoid the fates that befell his father and grandfather, whom he views as victims of a cruel world that took away their sense of self-worth by depriving them of the means and their ability to provide for their families. And speaking of family, that's the grand twist. The ultimate driving force behind Bludd's perfection in his craft, his love and commitment to always provide for his own family. Yup, Major Bludd, enemy, mercenary, family guy. Who would have thought? Anyway, towards the latter half of the real American heyday in the 80s, as more and more unique Cobra characters were introduced, Major Bludd was turned more into a minor character and was kinda lost in the shuffle, which if you ask me, blows. As such a short story in Hearts and Minds has shown, there could be so much more to explore with his character. After the original Major Bludd figure, we only got two more versions from the original toy run. A Sonic Fighter version in 1991 with a ginormous backpack. And then in 1994, a Battlecore version that sports, if you didn't think Bludd looked villainous enough, added spikes on his helmet to drive it home. Interestingly though, while both versions still had the Major's iconic eye patch, they both did away with the heavily armored right arm. Oh well, I guess two articulated arms are better than one. The 25th anniversary of G.I. Joe gave us more updated versions of the OG Bludd, which is perfectly fine with me. Although, you could say that the last one, released in 2008, leaned more in a cartoony aesthetic for the Major. But if you want the actual lighter toned and simpler Major Bludd from the cartoon though, Super 7 has got your back with their larger Ultimates version that released this year. Not the best in my opinion, but if you want your toys looking like they stepped right out of the television screen, then this Bludd will do nicely. In my honest opinion though, the real ultimate toy version of Major Bludd would be the one that we got in 2021 from Hasbro's Classified line. While I wasn't collecting Classified at the time, I do remember Bludd being one of the most highly sought after figures in the line for quite some time, fetching a very high price on the secondary market. Now, while I was holding out for the inevitable re-release of Bludd as a classically styled retro figure, when the opportunity came to get myself a decently priced version of this guy, I took it. Classified Major Bludd is the perfect mix of the original design amped up with a lot of modern elements, most notable of which is an actual cybernetic arm. You know, now that I think about it, this specific design would be a dead ringer for the Renegades version of Major Bludd. I mean, the similarities are all there. The extremely scarred face, the shorter crop of hair under the helmet, and the previously mentioned robotic arm to replace an original one that may have been bitten off by, I don't know, an alligator? Makes perfect sense if you ask me. And speaking of perfect sense, if you found this story about the Major entertaining, it would most likely follow that you'd be interested in another Cobra agent. So why not check out one of my favorites, the Cobra Saboteur, Firefly. Or if you want other Joe stories, you could check out this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.